Thanks for joining us. We have a really great turnout. People are trickling in. Over 200 people have registered for the session, which is always very rewarding. But more importantly, I think it really signals how engaged this community always is. For those who don't know, my name is Betsy Agar. I am the Buildings Policy Director at Efficiency Canada, and we are housed at Carleton University in Ottawa. Carleton acknowledges the location of its campus on the traditional unceded territories of the Algonquin Nation. And I have the privilege of hosting this session from where I live and work on the unceded territories of the Tsleil-Waututh and Squamish peoples, which is also known as North Vancouver. Efficiency Canada is the national voice for an energy-efficient economy. We envision a future where Canada uses energy efficiency to the fullest potential. To fulfill our mandate, our small, mighty team researches and identifies effective energy efficiency policies. We communicate the benefits and significance of investing in energy efficiency, and we work to mobilize the energy efficiency community for collective action and change. In that, we work on energy efficiency in buildings, of course, as well as ending energy poverty, improving appliance and equipment standards, transforming business models, preparing a diverse and skilled workforce, and advancing utility demand-side management, all in the name of energy efficiency. We're hosting this session as part of research we are conducting in partnership with the Recover Initiative. And in that, we're looking at how Canada's retrofit accelerators and market development teams are operating, the barriers they continue to face, as well as evidence of market transformation. So today, we're going to be checking in on progress by 4 of Canada's deep retrofit accelerators. They're going to briefly present their models and successes in moving the market while acknowledging ongoing challenges. Our research is also looking at work being done outside Canada. So we'll hear from experts offering alternative approaches to how Canada is working. And then once both presentations are complete, our international guests will provide their reflections on what they heard from the Canadian retrofit accelerators, and to foster what we hope will be a genuine learning exchange to the best this online forum can offer. Presenters and panelists will then engage each other in a moderated discussion. Then we'll open up the discussion to audience questions, which my colleague Lindsay Telfer will help me facilitate. We're going to be using the Q&A box, so that helps people to upvote questions, but feel free to put comments and additional thoughts and materials in the chat box for everyone to see. All of this work is also helping Efficiency Canada understand what Canada's retrofit mission needs to look like and to achieve. So I'm just going to take a few minutes at the end to discuss our evolving vision. Over the last few months, we've been interviewing groups that are working on retrofit market transformation in regions across Canada. Today's presenters are all recipients of the Deep Retrofit Accelerator Initiative funding, or DRAI, as most of us call it. That said, our research includes groups operating outside of DRAI, either independently or as part of the Greener Neighborhoods pilot program, which I will describe a little later in this session. So before I turn it over to our presenters, I just want to provide a little bit of context. DRAI is a federal program directed at large or complex buildings that fall under Part 3 of Canada's Building Code. So at its highest level, DRAI recipients are charged with aggregating demand, making it easier for building owners to get started on their retrofit journeys, building capacity, strengthening solution provider networks, and knowledge mobilization. So with that very brief introduction, we're going to navigate west to east, hearing from Garrett Clark, who's a program specialist at the Alberta EcoTrust Retrofit Accelerator, Adam Trovato, who's a principal at Simplify Energy Consultants. He will present on behalf of the Four Winds Retrofit Accelerator. Brian Purcell, who's a VP Policy and Programs at the Atmospheric Fund, also known as TAF. And Lori Rand is the co-founder and senior advisor to the Recover Initiative on the East Coast. I've given each presenter only 5 minutes or so to highlight key points about their accelerators. There is a lot of information on their slides, but I don't want you to panic. There is going to be a recording of this, as you may have heard, and the slides will also be made public. I want to also encourage you to reach out to your local retrofit accelerators or market development teams to really learn more about what's happening in your region. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to be introducing each of the speakers one by one. So speakers, when your slide comes up, please unmute and jump in. And Lindsay is in control of slides, so just signal when it's time to move to the next slide. With that, Garrett gets to set the standard and kick us off.
Perfect. Thank you, Betsy. So yeah, as Betsy mentioned, my name is Garrett Clark, and I'm with the Alberta EcoTrust Retrofit Accelerator. So just to highlight who Alberta EcoTrust is, we are a charity that leads and catalyzes environmental and climate action projects that enhance the well-being of Alberta's communities. So we're Alberta focused with our program. And we're also a founding member of the Low Carbon Cities Canada Network. And as part of that network, we work to advance climate leadership work already being undertaken by the cities of Calgary and Edmonton. So the Alberta EcoTrust Retrofit Accelerators team, we offer coaching support through deep retrofit planning, design, and implementation. That's a big part of our program. Participants come on board and they're paired with a dedicated coach, and that coach helps them to articulate their goals, identify priorities, navigate financing and funding applications or opportunities. And the coach liaises with consultants and finds ways for the participants to integrate retrofits into their regular maintenance schedules. While no capital grants are provided through our program, 50% funding or 50% cost share is available for deep retrofit plans. So essentially studies and assessments to align those deep retrofits with their capital plans. Another thing that our program does is we support the development of Alberta's sustainable retrofit industry through capacity building, training, peer-to-peer networking, and research by working collaboratively with industry leaders. So that's shown here with the network map on the right of the slide. And that's a visual representation of the groups that we work with in the retrofit industry. It's not everyone, but it's a good representation. And these include, of course, our funders, Natural Resources Canada and RBC through some Tech for Nature grants. Building owners underneath, those are the participants. Those are the ones we engage and coach. And then financing providers. So there are many here, but you can see we engage with those groups, the service providers, which are effectively the consultants to get the work done. And then we have our ecosystem, which is very much the capacity building side. We're doing specific work with the Alberta Energy Efficiency Alliance, Pembina Institute, and the Southern Alberta Institute of Technology to identify systemic barriers and gaps in Alberta's retrofit ecosystem. And an example of one resource coming from this work is the Retrofit Vendor Network, which is an online database of experienced consultants, contractors, and suppliers that's built and managed by the Alberta Energy Efficiency Alliance. That database is live and active right now and open to new applicants. And other examples include research and white papers from the Pembina Institute and local discovery sessions from SAIT focused on a variety of retrofit topics. Jump to the next slide. So some barriers we've run into are early adopter costs, which probably isn't surprising to anyone, and fragmented policy and regulatory systems, which just make it harder for people to adopt retrofits. The incentives for building improvements are lacking in Alberta. And while the studies we've completed to date are very interesting, the creation of palatable business cases is a significant challenge we're facing. To address this, we're working hard on the business case to demonstrate the value of retrofits beyond energy cost savings. We're working with tax incentives. We're working with the non-tangibles like comfort, long-term planning, all of the other parts that might add value to your business, aside from just energy cost savings. And we're also finding that collaboration with consultants and organizations that are already engaged are the strongest driver of participation in our program. Although we do target small building owners directly through outreach, events, and advertising. So to date, we have engaged over 130 building owners in Alberta, representing over 1,800 buildings, and we completed over 400 high-level desktop assessments and approximately 10 deep retrofit plans, with another a dozen or so in the works, and that number is going to keep going up. And as I've mentioned a couple of times, we're working to transform the retrofit market in Alberta by building the capacity of the industry to deliver valuable insights and products. not necessarily stuff that's been done in the past, but adding value and really digging into what's valuable to the building owners. We also want to increase the awareness of benefits and opportunities for unconventional financing in Alberta. In terms of a game changer, you'll see what the other retrofit accelerators bring up, and I think all of those are applicable here too in Alberta. But one thing would be the continued greening of the grid for us. We're mainly a natural gas grid right now, and as we green, that will allow electrification to have a large impact. And just to jump onto that further, natural gas is cheap in Alberta, which makes electrification challenging, which is why we are exploring redefining how we approach business cases aside from just energy costs. That's it in a nutshell, and I'll hand it over to Adam to talk about Four Winds.
Awesome. Thank you, Garrett. As mentioned, my name is Adam Travato, and I'm with Simplify Energy Consultants. We're one of the key partners of the Four Winds and Associates Deep Retrofit Accelerator. Four Winds is an Indigenous situational support and program manager based in Alberta, who has been working for over 30 years in Indigenous communities to deliver various projects, many of which are based around sustainability and energy efficiency. Our accelerator is focused on building capacity for Indigenous organizations regionally constructed to Alberta. The goal is to accelerate retrofit projects, build internal organizational capacity, and train and mentor Indigenous people to participate in the retrofit economy. So our program is fully funded and provides most Indigenous owned, managed, or operated commercial and community buildings within Alberta access to a comprehensive set of energy retrofit programming that sees each organization have access to energy audits, energy management software implementation, custom engineering projects, as well as capacity building and educational material. Our program covers pretty much all buildings with four walls and a roof, other than single family homes, duplexes, and a couple specific outliers, but otherwise allows for Indigenous organizations to enter in all their facilities with the goal of enabling a portfolio-wide approach, ensuring that all assets are actively managed and monitored, and that all these assets within their portfolio are being considered within their capital plans. As well, our program is mentoring 5 Indigenous graduates who are fully employed over the duration of the project, and they're being trained on energy audits, engineering, energy management systems, and building fundamentals, with the goal of making them ideal candidates to participate in the retrofit economy following the project, working with different engineering firms, consulting firms, and contractors, government organizations, or whoever they see fit. The goal of our project broadly is to build capacity within these Indigenous organizations to manage their assets more effectively, access capital for completing the actual retrofit projects, and to provide them with the technical deliverables that can influence their capital plans, help provide access to capital, and reduce the barriers to retrofitting the facilities I'll get into in a second here. As you can see from the graphic on the top right corner, our program is relatively straightforward. It generally starts with a building list submission where the communities will submit their community buildings along with their utility bills. From here, we analyze the utility bills themselves and do a detailed evaluation of the contracts and rates of each community, ensuring that each organization is actually on a solid rate. We're in a deregulated market here in Alberta. So that's a major opportunity that we found for the communities we're working with, and have often found savings in the tens of thousands per organization from simply renegotiating utility rate. So a pretty major win for the program there to just support these communities with immediate cost savings upon entering the program. Following the utility analysis, typically provide a NASHRAE Level 2 energy audit on the facilities, which is followed by an upload of this information into our program energy management software, which is meant to help organizations track and manage their facilities and provide detailed capital plans. Once this is complete, we do custom engineering projects that are scoped out based on the findings of the audits. So it's not really a cookie cutter engineering report. Rather, it's custom to the needs of the facility, overlaid with the needs of the community. So that can be anything from IFT drawings for a new boiler system, as-built drawings on the facility, a solar and roof assessment, or a recommissioning project. It really is whatever the community needs, as long as it supports retrofitting these facilities. So once we're done with all that work, we're actively supporting these communities to apply for funds, whether it be through ISC, Indigenous Services Canada, the GICB program, or any program that's available to our clientele. If you could switch to the next slide, please. Our program has worked with over 40 or so organizations in the first year and a half. And over that time, we've assessed over 200 buildings. And that's given us really solid insights into the barriers for retrofits for Indigenous communities. For one, community capacity is a huge barrier, as most communities don't have dedicated staff to move these projects forward. Thus, a lot of the time the work can stall at the community level. Linking to that, availability to and access to data. There's often not drawings available, which we as energy consultants like to have. The utility bills can be hard to find or in varied formats. So often the data we're working with is not ideal. The condition of the assets is a major barrier because the condition is suboptimal. The goal of the community is just to get these buildings up to par rather than looking at deep retrofits and ambitious projects. Higher organizational priorities. So just based on the socioeconomic conditions of most of these communities, sustainability and environment, although they're important, are lower priorities than training, education, employment, healthcare. So we try and use sustainability and efficiency as a vehicle to look at these other priorities. And then funding to implement the projects is limited, and often the existing asset and building management practices are not to the level of more sophisticated organizations or building owners. And really it's about treading water and just keeping the doors open on these facilities. Ultimately, our game changer is to just support these communities. We want all of our communities to be funding ready and have all the access and up to information and the data to support them as they try and build out sustainable communities. The typical community in Alberta is funded in a way that simply maintains their facilities. Like I said, to keep the doors open. Our program arms the communities with the necessary data to access more funding through programs, but as well arms them with the information and deliverables to ask for more comprehensive facility needs. So rather than going to their typical funders with standard building improvements like a roof replacement or a furnace swap, our communities are now equipped with the necessary information to ask for more impactful projects that take the community buildings to the next level. Rather than just asking for a new roof and a furnace now, they have the documentation, the metrics, and everything that they need to now ask for a roof with a solar PV system and some heat pumps, and really make their facilities lower operating costs, more high functioning, and more efficient and lower emissions, which is really all we're trying to help achieve. In sum, our program is designed to support Indigenous organizations to more effectively manage, capital plan, and access capital for their facilities. And it provides organizations with the data, information, and deliverables to do so. That's all from us, and I'll hand it over to Taff. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Adam. Hello, my name is Brian Purcell. I'm the Vice President of Policy and Programs at the Atmospheric Fund. For those who don't know us, we are a public agency with a mandate to support climate change mitigation across the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area. And for a number of years now, we've been operating a retrofit accelerator with support of the DRAI program, as well as the McConnell Foundation and some of our own capital that we've contributed to support the program. Our accelerator supports multi-residential buildings across the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area, and on a case-by-case basis, sometimes slightly beyond that geography, where we have great projects to support that need our help. And that's across all types of multi-residential housing. We work with social housing or community housing, co-ops, but also with rental apartments and condominiums as well. Our goals, of course, are to accelerate deep retrofits. We define a deep retrofit as something targeting over 40% carbon reduction. And we have projects across that range from 40%, just doing that minimum for our criteria, up to those pursuing 90% or greater reductions in carbon emissions. In addition to supporting the acceleration of deep retrofits, we want to make these deep retrofits easier, faster, more affordable, and do this in a way that supports affordability, not just of those projects, but also affordability of housing, which is a big priority in our region. We're very conscious of the importance of housing affordability as we operate our accelerator. And that shows up in a number of ways. One, we prioritize wherever we can, working with affordable housing providers, particularly nonprofit or public housing providers, where we can offer more generous financial support as well for retrofit planning and implementation supports. We also, in the rental sector, we're very careful to have sometimes difficult conversations with owners to ensure the projects we are supporting aren't directly going to be used as a mechanism to increase rents above the guidelines in our province, as that's not the story we want to be telling about retrofits, financing them in a way that's detrimental to the well-being of low-income tenants. So that's something we screen for in the process. Also, through working with owners and operators to find the best solution for their building that's the most affordable long-term, and we think that's going to promote long-term housing affordability. So I mentioned we have a goal of 40% carbon reduction for the projects we support through to the full completion and beyond of the retrofit. But of course, we don't know whether that's in the cards as we engage with buildings. For example, we've to date, last count, provided detailed building advice to 122 different buildings comprising almost 5,000 housing units across the region. Of course, a lot of that is just initial support, looking to see if they have buildings that are a good candidate, coming up with initial estimates of costs and benefits. We have about 40 buildings in various stages of detailed design, construction, or in a few of them, completed construction, and we're supporting commissioning and measurement and verification to document the outcomes. We really try and be there for the full project lifecycle to support people and building operators. And of course, in the initial stages, we explore with them what's possible, what they have an interest to do. And if we can get to 40% or better carbon reduction, we're delighted to work with them in a more detailed way through implementation and even post-completion to make sure they're getting the best outcomes out of the retrofit that are possible. We have a team of about 11 full-time equivalent, as well as support from other members of our organizations. And we rely on a wide range of partners in the industry. We have pre-qualified engineering service providers and other partners that support us on financing and on education of building operators. And we work with a wide range of contractors and consultants as well, especially as many of the building owners come to us with pre-existing relationships or preferences in their contractors and consultants. Our goal with all of them is to create a team environment on the retrofit and help drive better outcomes and be part of the owner team in terms of working with the consultants, contractors to get the best possible outcome on the retrofit. The next slide, please. So a little bit more about how we operate. The scope of our services, it starts from that initial outreach from the building owner, depending on where they are. Sometimes they just don't even know what's involved and haven't looked at it yet. And we're helping them screen their portfolio to look for suitable candidate buildings, do those initial feasibility studies, evaluate the business case. Other times they come to us and they've already done some of that work and really are stuck on a project and need help to get it launched. So we're really just meeting the buildings where they are and supporting them from then. We have both our technical support as well as financial support for all stages from preliminary feasibility studies through to detailed design work, as well as if the project moves forward for commissioning and measurement and verification and resident engagement. Through all those phases, we're providing both financial support to help with those project soft costs, as we might call them, as well as our own team's technical support, quality assurance support, for example, to help get the best possible outcomes. In addition to working directly with those building owners on those projects, we're also doing a number of broader market development activities to help with the broader goal of accelerating deep retrofits. Some examples here is that we've been working with industry to develop a pre-qualified list of providers who provide prefabricated exterior panels, insulated panels for retrofit application. So we have a pre-qualified list. We're just doing a second round to expand that and helping to connect those providers to retrofit projects. Many of the same providers who are doing prefabrication for new construction are interested in being this retrofit market, which we think is a great idea and can help really increase the feasibility of exterior envelope work in retrofit. Another example, we are working with the industry to develop an enhanced reserve fund or asset management plan type of report that combines features of a deep energy retrofit study with features of a traditional asset management plan or reserve fund study. A lot of interest in that program. Relatedly, we're working to bring costs down over time through things like prefabrication, where we've seen so far about a 10% cost savings potential compared to conventional site-built exterior cladding. And we think that can go further in the future as the industry ramps up. Looking at new types of heat pumps, like air to water heat pumps, for example, that for certain buildings can unlock much lower cost heat pump options that are more consistent with the existing equipment. And also one thing we really try and do, both for affordability, but also for time and cost savings, is find a way to retrofit all these buildings while they remain occupied. For affordability reasons, we don't want to be moving people out to do a retrofit. We've been able to do that on all our retrofit projects so far, even when initially the view of the contractor or owner has been that this would require moving people out. We've been able to work with the design teams and find ways to retrofit with tenants in place. That might increase costs slightly in the retrofit, but it improves the business case because you're not creating a situation where you have a year plus of no rental income. So it's better for tenants and better for owners to do this while the buildings are occupied where it's possible. And that's something we've really worked on, demonstrating how far you can go in an occupied building. And I'll pass it on to Recover.
Thanks, Brian. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. My name's Lori Rand, and I am the senior advisor with the Recover Initiative, and I'm also a co-founder of Recover. My co-founder, Emma Oven, describes us as the new kid on the block. We are a new organization, new-ish. We were established in 2020, and really we're focused primarily on technical studies and a bit of capacity building prior to applying for DRAI funding. We've actually got funding through both the DRAI and the GNPP. It's mostly DRAI, but a bit of GNPP money. We also have a bit of foundation money that we've got to augment that, and a small loan from HCI3, or one of our project partners. So the funding on the screen isn't complete. We do offer, or we do ask for, a small fee for service for the building transformation program, which I'll tell you about in a minute. That's essentially a small fee to cover some of our expenses that we ask for with our commercial owners that work with us. Recover is a non-for-profit, and we have scaled from 0 full-time employees to 19 full-time employees as of last count, which is pretty recently. So from May of last year until now, we went from 0 to 19. And we have a board of directors with 6 members. Because we're the new kids on the block, we needed to leverage a strong partner network in order to be successful in being funded by NRCan. And so we're working with the Building to Zero Exchange, the Union of Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq, One North End, RFS Energy, HCI3, which is part of the LC3 network, Navigate Energy, and then some service delivery partners. So what we are doing, there's 3 pillars to our work. And so our core services relate to working directly with building owners, providing concierge or navigator services. We very much are in early phases with the building owners that we're working with. And so we, through the DRAI program, we're targeting doing 40 to 60 feasibility studies and then moving a percentage of those through to implementation. And it's unlikely, given that DRAI really lasts 3 years, that we'll see too many projects actually go all the way to the end of construction integration of this program. So right now we're with most of the owners we're working with, we're in the feasibility study stage, although we have the earlier projects are starting to move forward towards implementation. So as part of our services with owners, we're offering business case development and guidance with funding and financing. In some cases, that looks like we're actually supporting them with writing grant applications. In other cases, it's just linking them up with likely opportunities for them to apply for. We're really working on a case-by-case basis in terms of this because we have to meet owners where they're at. So depending on what resources they have, they need different things from us. When we get to that part in a few years, we'll also be supporting on actual deep retrofit design work and funding support for construction-based services. We're not paying for capital expenses, we're paying for people to have design. To support all of that, especially because really this is an emerging area across the country, but particularly in Atlantic Canada, holistic deep retrofits. We have invested extensively in research. And so we have a research team that has created a building stock database. They've got currently something like 80% of our buildings are in a building stock database, and they're using that to develop a retrofit roadmap for us. So what that will look like is business plans of the retrofits for each of the 4 Atlantic provinces. From that research, and that retrofit roadmap is likely probably hear from us about that in March or spring of next year. But from that roadmap, we'll be leveraging what we learn to not necessarily pivot, but augment our services. And we will be using what we learned to build tools and other resources. So we're moving towards supporting implementation. Additionally, right now, we're working primarily one-to-one on single buildings, but we're starting to move towards portfolio analysis. We're not working with anyone on that just yet. You can see from our kind of ecosystem diagram, we have research partners, we have service partners, but we don't have finance partners yet. And so we need to solidify some financial partnerships in order to help our building owners move ahead with these projects. Next slide, please. So we are in early adoption with our accelerator. Certainly access to project financing, and this one can't be understated. Our first projects that have been moving through, we've been working with one particular project partner for something like 9 months to try and put the financing in place and the funding. The fragmented and nascent supply chain. So we really have, I think, in addition to that, or maybe hand in hand with that, is that we have a long-standing culture of piecemeal retrofits in our region. We've had, especially in Nova Scotia, but also in the other 3 provinces, we've had a lot of incentives for standalone measures like heat pump, and not a lot of holistic effort on buildings. And in part because of that, we have owner distrust of the industry. And that comes from this piecemeal culture where we don't typically see owners hiring design teams to develop a holistic plan for their building. We see people identifying problems and putting out fires. So there's mechanical system failure, and they call free contractors to sort it out now. That approach has varying degrees of success. And with that, there has been a lot of distrust. Success, and also wildly differing costs presented to owners related to those projects. So how we've been aggregating demand, when we kicked off as this iteration of Recover, we held a series of regional events where we launched ourselves and had stakeholder engagement with building owners. We've also leveraged the networks of our key personnel and our strategic partners. We definitely have a pipeline happening, but it's a great region to be working with word of mouth because everybody knows everybody in our region to some extent, but it's challenging for us. The rural and urban divide is challenging. A very large percentage of buildings that we need to be targeting are in rural places.
Lori,
Yes.
you guys have each sort of been increasing as you go.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I will wrap right up. How we're transforming the market, we're really working with everybody where they're at, filling gaps. In terms of a game changer, each of the Atlantic provinces has a net zero by 2050 goal. In Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and PEI, that goal is actually legislated, and PEI's target is actually 2040, which is pretty ambitious. We have an opportunity because they don't really have a concerted plan in any case for how buildings are going to fit into that, but it's about 30% of our emissions. And so potentially more than that So that's our game changer.
Sorry, Betsy. Amazing. No, I was laughing as well. For your time go from 6 minutes, well done, Garrett, 9 minutes to 10 minutes. I thought, okay. Needless to say, there's so much that's going on in all these regions, and we're so happy that this work is being done. If we want to maybe give a golf clap or play with your reactions and thank our speakers, just a quick reminder, I think we've sorted this, but put your questions in the Q&A box. Retrofit Accelerators, I see you guys answering questions, which is super. If you have your hand up, I'm sorry to disappoint you. I'm not going to answer it. Please use the Q&A box. I think everyone should be getting this picture that our interviews have been really very information rich. We're surfacing so many ongoing challenges, but many encouraging indicators that change is in the air. I just want to quickly take a look at some quotes that tell us this. Do you want to move to the next slide, please? These are some of the things that were heard during these interviews. Now we have all these different players in a discussion that we never had before with people who've never heard of us before across the whole province. The demand for retrofits is coming from new markets outside of the typical metropolitans and climate zones, so Indigenous communities, parts of interior BC and northern Alberta, as well as in Atlantic provinces where the action wasn't happening prior to now. Next slide, please. Rather than overpaying for utilities, Indigenous communities can invest in facilities, they can invest in programming. Adam raised this point that they're able to redirect their money, whereas they would have paid that money to utilities. And many communities and building owners don't even know that they have a range of options other than the one that an installer might put in front of them. So these are major shifts that are happening on the demand side. Next slide, please. There's this sense that the market is willing and ready. So you have builders that just want to do a better job. They're very interested in our programs for that reason because they can learn from each other. The accelerators are bringing designers, suppliers, contractors, and trades on board with doing deep retrofits and then helping them find and work with each other. They're also helping to build trust in the solution. This was an interesting one. They're becoming these third-party entities that can validate what the industry is saying, likely because they're not trying to sell the owners something. While industry ambition is growing, uncertainty is limiting that growth. We don't want to just be a company that swells up to deliver a big program and then reduces our staffing. The uncertainty around what comes next has made us apprehensive. This is particularly interesting to us, next slide please, because it turns out Canada is really good at energy efficiency. In fact, we manufacture a lot of what we need inside of our borders, such as insulation, HRVs, windows, smart controls. We have a huge economic opportunity in energy efficiency. Efficiency Canada takes the position that energy savings really should be one of Canada's nation-building projects in both new and existing buildings. Ramping up the construction sector to build 500,000 new homes every year will kickstart the supply chain and workforce, but ramping up the sector to retrofit 500,000 homes every year will sustain the industry for decades to come. The industry is looking for certainty. Young people want lifetime careers, not gigs and short-cycled construction booms. Adding new while preserving existing homes and buildings signals the market can start to invest in innovative products that transform construction, such as through prefabrication, for example. We need to be cutting ribbons on factories that modernize construction and anchor economic stability in communities for beyond 10 years. Next slide, please. And that feeling of uncertainty is somewhat universal. We're getting all this great data, but there's not a long enough window to know if you're having an impact and measure that. And Lori alluded to this in her presentation. So the DRAI and GNPP funding is set to end March 2027, and they will have only been operating for about 3 years. And this brings me to our international guests who have experience weathering these cycles. Amy Egarter is a managing consultant at DPACT Consulting. Some of you may know Amy from her days working on Realize by RMI, which was a market transformation program inspired by Energiesprong out of the Netherlands. She now lives in Berlin working with the Energiesprong Global Network. And Sam Rashkin is a senior researcher at the U.S. Department of Energy's Oak Ridge National Lab. While Sam may not be a household name, the outcome of his work on Energy Star is. Sam has long experience in market transformation and will speak to us about taking an impact investor perspective on scaling deep retrofits Amy. We're only about 6 minutes behind, so I will turn it over to you.
Great. I will try to stay to my 15 minutes. Hi, everyone. My name is Amy. Thank you, Betsy, for the introduction. I'm excited to present some of the progress and findings from the Energy Strong Global Alliance and our theory of change. We were recently funded by the World Habitat Foundation to reflect and look back on how the market development teams started from the Netherlands and expanding outwards, and key lessons learned, yes, points of success, challenges, etc. As Betsy said, I was working in the United States up until about 2.5 years ago on the Realize program. So this research was also very near and dear to me, having worked in the US and also collaborated with Pembina and Betsy and others in Canada. This is the short agenda that I put together. I'll talk briefly about the Energy Strong model, what a market development team is, how these teams established themselves across Europe, and the key development phases that they went through, and then some differentiating factors and success factors, takeaways from these interviews with the different market development teams. Finally, just a little bit about what the Energy Strong Global Alliance is doing right now to facilitate collaboration between these regional teams and what we plan for the future. The principles of the Energy Strong model, let's go through what it's all about. This is the classic photo of an Energy Strong retrofit where you have your prefabricated panels, your solar, you're bringing your building into the future with or without a Tesla these days. The program started in the Netherlands and then grew to a European movement and also in the US, in North America. And the program was guided by 4 or 5 core principles that helped the program expand past affordable multifamily housing and now into market rate housing, single family homes, and even commercial buildings in some of the market development teams. Despite those market expansions, these 4 core principles have stayed in the program. First of all, the program needs to be easy to understand. The approach has to have a simple message and a clear decision-making process on what kind of retrofit you're going to get and what are the benefits of that, taking all the brain damage out of doing an analysis, all that stuff as a homeowner. Fast and efficient execution, minimizing disruption, and ensuring there's a short renovation timeline. Again, this is where the industrialized construction prefabrication aspect comes in, of rewrapping the building from the outside so people don't have to move out of the building. Good quality and future proof of the building. So the solutions have to be durable and meet the highest local regulations. And then finally, affordable and financeable projects. And all of that should go into a program that is scalable across many different buildings within the region. The Energy Strong Global Alliance, as Energy Strong, as a program, as a movement of retrofit process spread across Europe, there became a need to coordinate between all of the different markets. And so in 2022, the Energy Strong Global Alliance was founded with the goal to coordinate and unite efforts across the different countries and accelerate adoption. Currently, we have market development teams. There's the one in the Netherlands, then the UK, France, Germany, and Italy. Then we have some interested partners that are in the process of getting funded in Ireland and in Austria, and then some more engagement with Eastern Europe as of late. You might be wondering at this point on the next slide, what is a market development team? You said this a couple times. What is it? The market development teams are typically groups of 10 to 30 people that act as orchestrators within each country or region, facilitating collaboration, product development, etc. Their mission is really to create a self-sustaining, functional, growing, deep energy retrofit market. So what the accelerators are doing now. You can see a typical MDT will collaborate with the financial sector, the supply and the demand side, so offer and demand, and then also public authorities if there needs to be any petitioning for changes in legislation, etc. So those are what Energy Strong market development teams are. I'm just going to step through some of the findings from the paper that we recently published. This is a timeline that shows the key points in the development of the various market development teams. There are 3 things that I tried to call out for all of these teams. First and foremost was the formation of the team with their initial funding and how much funding they got, when the first pilot projects happened, and then when the volume deals happened in each of the countries. And a volume deal is when a certain amount of housing supply comes to the table and says, we want to retrofit 10,000 of our residential units or our homes. And then the supply side, the manufacturers, solution providers were also at the table and said, great, we can do X amount per year at Y cost. Taking it from the beginning in 2010 was when the Dutch program started. They had an enormous amount of funding. They had 60 million euros over 6 years. That included the cost to cover the pilot buildings and the initial team costs, but it still was the largest amount of funding that we saw for any of the market development teams. 4 years later, they finished their first pilot projects, and in 2015, the Energy Sprong team in the Netherlands, they did a massive outreach, knowledge sharing, inviting people to the Netherlands for field trips to see what the retrofits had done. That's when you see the other European countries start to get involved. That's around 2016 was when our Rocky Mountain Institute got involved, and I'm sure Pembina was somewhere around there. And so that's also when the UK market development team formed. They went on a field trip. There was a delegation from the UK that went on a field trip. They saw the retrofits, and then they went back and they became founding members, got some funding, and they are still part of Energy Sprong UK today. In 2016, notably for the Dutch business case, they passed this law called the EPV law, which basically allowed them to convert the utility bill savings to an energy plan charge, and that helped to go and pay for the retrofits. They were the only country to have this kind of law passed, but it helps to secure the business case for these retrofits. Then the French market development team formed, and then a year later, the German market development team formed. The first volume deal was signed in the Netherlands. And then in 2018, we see that the Dutch market development team fades out. Once they have this big change in their business case and they have this volume deal, the market development team players fade into industry and are pushing it from different organizations at this point. We have the first German and French pilot projects, the French volume deal. If you go to the next slide, you can see the rest of the timeline. Then we have the German volume deal, the first UK pilot projects, and then finally in 2020, the Italian team forms. They had been trying to get funding since 2015, but with changes in the federal government structure in Italy, it was very difficult for them. They got very close to getting government funding several times, and then the government would fall apart and they would have to start over again. So they ended up getting their funding from a philanthropic organization. Another notable thing, the German government again and again has dedicated massive amounts of resources to making this happen. There was 300 million devoted to industrialized construction upskilling in Germany overall that helped the Energy Sprong program in Germany. And then there's an additional 15% subsidy for any Energy Sprong style retrofit that still exists today. Then in 2024, the problem this time last year, the Italian team signed a pretty big volume deal with the city of Milan. Again, because the federal support wasn't there in Italy, they're taking a more city-based approach to rolling out their program. And just some stats on the right, the average number of units in the volume deal was about 16,000. I would say none of the market development teams have reached those numbers yet. I think the German team is about halfway there. The Dutch market development team got to about 10 or 11,000. And then because the market development team disbanded, they stopped tracking the numbers. Then the time from first funding to the volume deal was about 4 years. So it was about 4 years of doing pilot projects and working with finance, policy, supply and demand to bring that deal together. Average staff was about 15 people. From that process, we extracted 4 key development phases that these teams went through. The first being onboarding, where individuals saw something inspiring, they got a team together, they started working towards a common goal, they conducted feasibility studies, set target, defined their vision, build their network, and all that culminated in securing initial funding for staff and pilot projects. Once they moved past that, it was more about operationalizing, structuring the market development team, completing those pilots, going on road shows, getting the word out about their program. Then phase 3 was continued growth and rollout. That was really defined by making the volume deal happen. Then phase 4 was market integration and sustainability. So what's your market team going to do? Are you going to integrate back into the market, or are you going to sustain yourself as an ongoing retrofit accelerator or innovation hub within your market? There were different approaches taken there. Key findings and lessons learned. We have 3 main market differentiating factors that we heard from all of the different teams. The first was the business case, both project and program business case. So in Germany, as I said, they really doubled down, tripled down on state funding, both for the market development team. That was from a legislative allocation of funding to that team, for the project subsidies, that 15% subsidy and the 300 million in offsite industrialized construction. Italy, they used a lot of philanthropic funding. They also had to compete with a pretty crazy program in Italy where they funded any retrofit program 110%. So that really stifled any innovation that could have taken place during, I think it was from probably 2015 to 2019, or maybe after that. I don't remember the exact dates. So they had a difficult time advocating for industrialized construction. And so had to adapt their approach a little bit, or their business case. Then using energy savings had varying levels of success. The UK couldn't really do it, but in the Netherlands and in France, it was quite impactful. We can go to the next slide, to the technical solutions. I will say Energy Sprong still does focus on industrialized construction and exterior panelized retrofits for the most part. The Italian team has more diversity in their approach, just due to the seismic zones that they have to deal with and needing to preserve historic architectural character. The Netherlands is also now experimenting with non-panelized approaches. So I think traditionally Energy Sprong is, you think of industrialized construction and panelized retrofits, it's not a hard and fast rule, and it's more about thinking about the retrofit as a product versus an individual project and sticking to those core principles. And then the last differentiating factor was how social dynamics come into play. In the Netherlands and France and in the UK, there was a huge focus on resident approval because that was needed to move forward with the retrofits. So there were all these programs about tenant education and buy-in, whereas in Germany, that's just not a thing for multifamily buildings, for better or worse. I think the more social aspect that Germany tried to play into was overcoming labor shortages to get more traction and doubling down on the prefabrication aspect. Some key success factors that all of the teams cited were, of course, strong funding and financial independence. Having that initial start and being able to do pilots was super important for them. The next two have to do with the team, making sure they have a good mix of backgrounds in the team, from real estate investment to building science, and having that entrepreneurial spirit, and then being able to have a strong network within the local region. Then the last two are more about communication, of how do you communicate your long-term vision and get people to buy into that? And how can you very clearly communicate to your local region the benefits of doing this? You can have the best solution in the world, but if nobody knows about it, that is a challenge. And I do think that the Energy Sprong movement did a really good job with getting the word out there, bringing people to field trips, etc., to get things across. Ongoing collaboration and expansion. I thought it might be interesting. The market development teams today, EGA hosts an annual workshop to discuss cross-cutting knowledge exchange themes, anything from new collaboration models to contracts, how those should be written, digital processes. We also all still work together on 4 to 5 ongoing EU grants that include pilots and research. And then because of all this getting us together, there's a lot of informal networking that happens as well. Very active Teams channels. And then what's next for EGA? We recently, as an umbrella organization, haven't had a lot of funding historically, but we did just receive some philanthropic funding to hire a few more staff for EGA. Hopefully that will allow us to produce new resources from the MDTs and project results that we can share more widely. And then things like this paper that we wrote on market development team onboarding and support. So I think on the website at this point, I think you can go on, if you go to the next slide, you can scan the QR code, download the paper, and then also see if you are a team interested in the approach, you can contact us and we can have individual calls and talk about what might fit for your market in terms of setting up a program. And that's it. I hope I didn't go too far over, but thanks.
No, you're doing great. That's super. Thanks, Amy. Lots of questions coming in. I see everyone's answering Q&A. There's Sam's slides currently. There you go. Thanks, Sam.
Welcome, everyone. I'm from the US, a little different flavor. but a lot of similarities. Thank you, Betsy, and the whole team for inviting me and Amy to speak here. So I'm going to talk about scaling deep energy retrofits in the US. And we start with the why, big Simonson fan. And so why are we so interested in deep energy retrofits? It begins by first understanding this big gap between existing housing and new housing. This graph shows a normalized energy use for all the different residential codes, starting with the Model Energy Code 1983 all the way up to the latest codes. And the takeaway here is homes built to the 1983 Model Energy Code compared to the latest codes is about a 60% gap in performance. And about 85% of the U.S. housing stock was constructed before 2000, or almost 2/3 before 1980. It really informs us that the U.S. housing stock represents, in effect, a big infrastructure issue. It's woefully substandard. So the next point we should understand is the scope of the investment opportunity. When you look at existing homes versus new home market size, it's 90 million versus 0.85 million. So it's about a 10x difference between the market for existing homes and the number of new homes we build per year. And then the energy reduction potential. In the US, we use a home energy rating system index, which I don't know is relevant, is applied across Canada. It's a score where 0 is a zero energy house and 100 and above is very inefficient. So the score reduction for an existing home would be from 140 to 70, let's getting to the latest codes. That's a 70-point HERS index improvement. In contrast, in new homes, if we go with above code certification like Energy Star, we go from a HERS index of 60 to 50. That's about 10 index points. So 7x greater savings per house, 10x greater market size. That's like a 70x greater investment opportunity for existing than new homes. And the next point is the quantification of the market transformation opportunities. If we do transform the U.S. housing stock, that represents over $40 billion of additional household disposable income each year because of the energy savings. In addition, because a home's value increases, that's about a $50+ billion per year additional tax revenue to local governments each year. And then the number of jobs that would be created varies from 270,000 to 675,000 jobs based on conversion rates we have for the amount of market size and number of jobs created per dollar market. The key thing, this is a lot of jobs that are not vulnerable to outsourcing and AI. So not only is it a huge number of jobs, it's also very secure jobs into the future. And then the last point is that when you look at the reduced peak demand, which is about 20%, you wind up significantly enhancing the grid security, which is a big deal in the US. These are big opportunities. Now we need to change. Key concept we talk about is scripting the change and the whole strategy around it, doing that. So the first part of that strategy is to assemble a lot of great wisdom, diverse stakeholder experts across national labs, regional energy offices, building science experts, retrofit program experts, industrialized housing, low-income housing, financing, insurance. Now, this is the old James Collins good to great concept he made famous, getting the right people on the bus, which is critical to all the most successful organizations. So we want to assemble all this diverse wisdom. And we begin with a hypothesis of where to script the change. And the hypothesis we start with is leading change. The process of leading change, scaling, whatever you want to call it, is a science entailing proven fundamentals that ensure predictable outcomes. Starting with that premise, we want to focus experts on scripting the change around these fundamentals for how change happens. We'll talk about critical scaling factors, leading change fundamentals, and avoiding early failures. And the big goal here is recognizing ambiguity is the enemy. You need to script critical moves if you want change to happen. So we need everyone focused around a common agenda in effect. So we start with what are the scaling factors? And great resource in this is Geoffrey Moore's Inside the Tornado. A lot of people refer to this. It's a seminal work on how innovation gets to market. And you have the traditional market diffusion curve. It can be shown as a bell curve or different ways. I show it this way, going from early adopters to mainstream users and then to laggards who finally wind up embracing innovation where it scales. And the key thing here is, in Geoffrey Moore's research, identifies a whole range of different factors, behavior factors associated with early adopters. I curate them into 3 groups. They accept cost value, they gamble on future rewards because they're willing to spend extra and expect big things from the new innovation. They accept uncertainty, they're venturesome, they don't care about if things are quite nailed down and setbacks are not a problem for them, and they accept high friction. They'll form innovation cliques to work out problems, they're worried about more complicated transactions. They are a different animal. And the behavior factors that he identifies for mainstream users, again, curated to the same key buckets. On cost value, they reject anything that's perceived as a high cost, and for value they don't understand. They're very discreet about new ideas, and they'll deliberate forever, understanding the value propositions. They reject uncertainty and insist on proven solutions, and they reject friction. They want whole product solutions and not going to form cliques. They want simple transactions. It is a completely different behavior pattern for them. So this winds up, you have this continuous market diffusion curve, and in fact, there's a chasm you have to cross to bridge these very different behaviors. And so if you don't do that, this dotted line shows most innovations that don't embrace the scaling factors, if you will, cost, value, uncertainty, and friction, you wind up flatlining. Good examples would be SIBs, construction, which is structural insulated panels, geothermal heat pumps for residential. A lot of technologies just don't make this across this chasm because they don't address these scaling factors. So this is the real challenge in scaling you have to address. And then there's these leading change principles I embrace a lot because having led 2 national programs, Energy Star Certified Home and Zero Energy Ready Home, to a point where a complete transformation happened in the housing industry, these really resonate with me as things that we wound up doing the biggest impact. I like to tell you they were intentional. A lot of the things we were doing were following instincts. There was no template for how you lead change when I started these programs back in November 1994. The 3 points here are follow the bright spots means you figure out what's working and don't get overwhelmed trying to identify and fix everything that's a problem, which is where so many scaling efforts just get waylaid and sidetracked from really making a difference. And then you have to shrink the change. If you overwhelm mainstream users, you never get started. And then find the feeling means you have to focus on what people really care about, meet them where they're at in terms of what makes them emotional. And so often we're imposing worldviews, carbon, or it might be getting away from fossil fuels, or it may be climate change, or we have all these concepts that may well be incredibly critical. But is that where we're going to meet the end users that we're targeting? And do we need to impose a worldview to make them change their behavior and embrace innovation that does yield the benefits we're after in terms of carbon or climate, whatever it may be? So that's the next step. And then the final point here about change is early failures are devastating. And you really got to avoid those. A big part of the focus early on was recognize there's extra risk. And because when we go from a low performance enclosure, which is poorly insulated and leaky, what we wind up having is a lot of thermal and airflow going from warm to cold. Thermodynamics, second law. That's what's going to happen. That's the way it's going to move. And the outcome is that we wind up having a warm surface inside on the cold side. So the inside sheathing on the winter will be warmer because of all the thermal and airflow getting through it. Everything changes when we go to high performance. Now we have well-insulated, airtight enclosures with much, much less thermal and airflow. So that means we have colder surfaces. And with all these factors considered, all these risk profiles, one, we have higher moisture risk because we have more wetting potential with colder surfaces, and less drying potential with less airflow getting through. Then we have low load comfort challenges. We have much less mixing because we have so much airflow going through ducted systems to meet the loads. It's such a low load system. And we have much less dehumidification, longer swing seasons, and much shorter cycling. So there may still be latent loads that are not being addressed. We can't have those failures. And finally, in indoor air quality, once we tighten up the building, we have less dilution of contaminant. So we have to understand these when we think about retrofitting buildings and make sure they're always fully addressed. Early failures are devastating. What's the progress we're making? What are we doing right now? We assembled the experts in all these key targeted stakeholder groups I mentioned. There were 24 total distributed with a skew towards the national labs and regional energy offices down to building science experts and programs, industrialized housing, but really good representation on the key ones that we were targeting. And then we started focusing on the first step, which was fact finding. What we had to do at first was to develop the foundational elements as context for this whole project that we were doing. And as context for the foundational elements, the point that really came out from the group was that deep energy retrofits are too overwhelming. The cost versus perceived value, friction, uncertainty, it's a really complicated endeavor, especially for a single intervention. It's completely foreign and not understood by the homeowners. It was really important to have this context for then focusing on our elements. And we needed elements that shrink the change and add clarity for homeowners, change they could understand, not be overwhelmed, and clarity about exactly what we were getting, why they should be interested in this whole new endeavor. Now we needed a name. The term deep energy retrofit is completely foreign, we mentioned, to homeowners. Why don't we switch to words they understand, words that they value, concepts that would completely fall in line with what they understand. So we went from deep energy retrofit to home energy renovation. Homeowners are constantly engaged in renovating their homes, so home energy renovation seemed to be a much more resonant term to use for than deep energy retrofit. Then we needed a definition. The primary definition from the Department of Energy for deep energy retrofits, an energy efficiency upgrade at least 50% better than a home's or similar home's historic energy consumption. Pretty complicated, pretty much a number of people don't understand or know why. So we went with a definition that would be much more understandable and would have a compelling reason to do it. So home energy renovation is an optimized sequence of upgrades. We shrunk it from a single intervention to an optimized sequence of upgrades that brings existing homes on par with the latest national code. You're no longer substandard while managing related risks. So again, shrinking the change and explaining what we're doing is we're going to take your biggest asset that you own, your home, and bring it up to standard. Now, the definition that would be public facing, we would probably take out while managing related risks because homeowners don't need to know that nuance. But you get the idea. Everything's about meeting people where they are and now having program names and definitions that make sense. So we needed a concept. What is an optimized sequence? And basically it's going from most to least cost effective and least to most disruption. So we want to do things in the beginning that have the best homeowner experience. It's not disruptive. They get a lot of cost-effective outcomes. They get comfort. Their house is quieter. They're getting all these experiences on the front end, build a customer base to bring them along to the harder, less cost-effective and more disruptive innovations. So step one might be the comprehensive attic upgrade. Every climate zone in the U.S., a comprehensive attic upgrade, which is the insulation, the air barriers, the air sealing, the wind baffles, possibly air sealing ducts that are in the attic. Doing an upgrade like is one that's a supply chain all ready to go for them. It applies to every single climate zone, and it's incredibly cost effective. What a great first experience to give a homeowner to whet their appetite and put them on a runway to more and more interventions for getting their home up to code. So get their attic up to code, number one. Step two would be air sealing, basic air sealing, again, to get pretty much up to code. But once you air seal and you have less infiltration, we need to make sure we have a fresh air system. What you call whole house ventilation, I'll call fresh air system because most people want fresh air and don't have a clue what ventilation is. So just again, always being public facing in terms of how we message. Then we move on to the more disruptive and less cost-effective applications like high-performance walls and foundations insulated to the latest code. And the last step might be to have high-performance windows to the latest code. Now, anywhere along that path, if you have to replace your HVAC system or seal your ducts, or you have to put a new water heater or new lighting and appliances, you make those energy efficient or Energy Star. Always a replacement. And to get ahead of where things might be going, you want to have HVAC that's replaced be adaptable for low load needs into the future. So things like variable speed start to make a lot of sense. So modulating furnaces, those kinds of things. And the other thing is to leverage opportunities to combine steps. You heard about Energy Sprung, where you have the right typologies and funding and bulk purchase arrangements and all the details can work out. That's a great way to combine steps. Similarly, if you're doing the air sealing, might be a good time to combine that with your whole house ventilation as a single one. Or when you're residing, now you can actually pull out the windows and flash them and seal them when you can't do that when the siding's back up. So maybe when you reside is a good time to replace the windows where there's no pan flashing and window flashing. 90% of the housing built before 2000, you can retrofit the moisture control layers, maybe add some continuous insulation. All those things can be combined. So recognize there's opportunities to combine steps, but for most people, there's a sequence you can go through that makes a lot of sense.
Just want to flag you're at about 18 minutes.
Oh, okay. So I'll wrap up pretty quick. See, essentially on the destination, we need to define success. And we define success as essentially, instead of a complicated goal, reduce energy use by 50%, to decarbonize affordable housing while lowering energy bills by 20%. We basically said where our destination is scaling home energy renovations. Goal is for millions of low-rise residences to be on an optimized path of upgrades to the latest code by 2035. And what I'm going to do basically is go to my last slide. So I'm going to break out of my slideshow since I'm at the end here. I tell you that as a group, we came up initially with 46 projects, and then we prioritized it down to 26 projects. Then we took these projects and we evaluated each of them based on how much impact they would have scaling deep retrofits, how much risk there was of achieving their deliverables that we planned out for them, and how costly they were based on costs that we assessed it would be for these 28 odd projects. And then we scoped them. So we had the 20 projects, you see all the costs, you have the impact and risk scores. And then what we did, we looked at low to high impact to graph the results and low to high risk to graph the results, where 10 is very high risk, 0 is very low risk, 10 is very high impact, and 0 is very low impact. So 10 is low risk, 0 is high risk, and so forth. So we have our scale and our 4-quadrant diagram. We have high impact, low risk investments. We have high impact, high risk investments in quadrant 2. And then we have quadrant 3 with low impact, low risk investments, and quadrant 4 with low impact, high risk investments. And then we have our cost based on dark is low cost, medium color circle is medium cost, and light circle is high cost. And for each project, over here, I'll highlight one. 8.3 is regionally specific DER paths. The score was 7.1, pretty high impact. Risk was medium, 5.6, and cost is medium. So there's your basic project 8.3 on the quadrant diagram. There are all the 26 odd projects all mapped out. And now we can be strategic. We have tier 1 high impact, low risk investments. We have tier 2 high impact, medium risk investments, tier 3 medium impact, low risk investments, and tier 4 medium impact and medium risk investments. And tier 1's most desirable because highest impact and least risk down to tier 4. And then we can look at all these investments, and now we can start strategically invest because they address the scaling factors, cost, value, friction, and uncertainty. And here's regionally specific. And maybe that's tier 2, but we could also decide we need that and invest in it earlier because the medium risk is worth it because we need to establish the product itself. What is a home energy renovation at the very beginning? So You adjust and pick your projects and investments, not just based on the tier, but based on sequentially how can you scale the market. You went from 46 initial projects to 24 prioritized, 18 top tier projects. I'll wrap up with this slide. Essentially, what we have now is a final roadmap and a conclusion. At present, deep energy retrofits that we call home energy renovations are too big a change to scale from all the evidence from the programs that just aren't scaling after decades and decades of support. Scaling barriers are not being addressed. Cost and value too high, friction's too high, and uncertainty is too high. Uncertainty about supply chain, uncertainty about savings, uncertainty about disruption. There's so many things that we're not addressing. And also things that are working have not been applied that we've identified. And these related risk challenges really need to be addressed. As a result, we have a minuscule market, and we see a future where the change is shrunk, the barriers are mitigated with key investments, and what's working successfully to transform other parts of the housing industry are applied to deep retrofits, and we manage the related risks. And that's the top tier projects, mutually reinforcing activities, and continually improving this strategic set of investments because things change over time. As a result, you have this conclusion. If the hypothesis is correct that leading change is a science, and the roadmap effectively applies the fundamentals for change, then big change should be a predictable outcome. We're addressing cost and value issues. We're addressing friction issues. We're addressing uncertainty issues. We've shrunk the change. We're building on what's working. That all these things should happen. Then the big change should lead to millions of homes on a path to home energy renovations by 2035. But this all requires a collective impact process, which means all the related stakeholders need to embrace a common agenda. There needs to be a backbone group leading the process, common metrics, all these things you need. We know from research at Stanford University, where big social change happens, need to be put in play as well. I'm going to leave it off here just to give you a sense. It's less important about the details than strategically the concepts that we applied all focus on scaling, and scaling as a science. And that's how important it is to have this concept that change is a science. So I hope this makes sense. And I'll pass it back to you guys.
Thank you so much. I knew that was going to be full of content. We've got lots of questions asking if we'll have your slides, which we've all agreed to. If you're willing, your contact information is also being sought. So thanks, both. Let's again open our little Zoom reactions or give a little golf clap for those of you who are on screen to thank our panelists. We are a bit behind, about 14 minutes. So I'm going to ask everyone to be really brief in what their statements are. Amy and Sam, I wanted just a couple of high-level thoughts on what you're hearing from the retrofit accelerators in Canada within the framing of your work. Amy, I'll have you kick us off.
I really think that getting these solutions scaled is really about community engagement, making sure people know about what you're doing. I think all 4 of the accelerators are doing that, which is really great. It was great to hear about how Lori's trying to address the rural divide. And then the first 2 presentations about really getting out there in the community and trying to engage and upskill people. Also really nice to see the prefab panel shout out. I hope that's going well. Just making sure that people know about what you're doing, I think is super important and something that we really try to do with Energy Sprung. So it's just nice to see that happening, and also seeing the different elements of market development team facilitation in the different teams. So it was great too.
Yeah, great. Sam, do you have some thoughts on this?
Just some high level thoughts. Again, I'm going to start by saying it's really impressive what you all are doing. And it's just, I love to see a lot of focus on the affordable housing and trying to just help people leverage all these services and financing and other incentives that are out there. So I think it's great we're doing that. What I will add to the mix just is obviously I'm completely focused on scaling. And so I get frustrated when I said Department of Energy. I think first year I got there, there was a big grant for about hundreds of millions of dollars went to 41 local governments to do much like what you're doing, accelerated programs They all competed based on innovative programs to promote energy efficiency in housing. My frustration with the program was there was just a lot of money thrown out there without any structure or strategic investment. And so the money went out, the programs operated strictly on grants. They did lots of retrofits and then they shut down as soon as they used up the grant money, and completely everything, no continuity and persistence in terms of return on investment. My big focus always is in just those short presentations, I want to know there's a return on investment for the money we're investing in programs like this. And I'd love to know strategies for persistence and what we're doing. So that's always my first big point, because that was hundreds of millions of dollars with zero outcome once they blew money for the people that were lucky enough to get all the money those local governments had, the households that would benefit, a very small number. The second thing is that energy, at least in the US, is a very shrinking value proposition. Housing costs are insane everywhere, Canada and the US. I think the cost in Vancouver, where Bitsy is based, is something like a ratio of median price and median income is like 12-1. So what happens increasingly is housing costs go up. The mortgage, the taxes, and the insurance becomes so big, the energy savings you can deliver becomes such a tiny fraction of the homeowner's monthly homeownership cost. And so I think we need to devote a lot of attention. And the same thing in terms of commercial buildings and apartments, I think is, again, the value of these buildings and rents going up so high, the benefits of the energy savings are shrinking there too. I think we have to be better at quantifying and researching and understanding of the non-energy benefits as well as the energy benefits. Because energy benefits, we know in this epic crisis of affordability, it's so much less. Energy improvements to commercial buildings improve productivity. I think commercial building owners spend maybe 100 times more on labor than they spend on energy. So if you can improve productivity, that's huge. If you're doing things, improving retention of renters, wellness benefits, so your renters are healthier. If you have higher rental rates because the buildings live better, if the return on investment you net out, even with incentives, is over 20 or 30%, we need to know those numbers. We need to be translating benefits of improvements in ways that the users understand and the building owners understand, in terms they understand. And today I didn't see a lot of metrics in terms, and the time was short, and maybe all that's happening in a very good way. My big point is I want to see those things because we have to be translating the benefits of retrofits because they're so impressive beyond the energy savings. And I don't think I'll stop there because I consume a lot of time.
And if you have some good examples where those have been communicated and researched, we would love if you could type some into the chat. That would be amazing. I did promise the Retrofit Accelerators each a chance to ask a question of you guys. I'm going to ask Brian. Do you have a question that you want to ask?
Sure. Thanks, Betsy. I had a question for Amy. I was just wondering if you could say more about what's happened in the Netherlands since they phased out the market development team in 2018. And I believe that was a similar date when they passed a law you mentioned was important to scaling. And so I was just curious what, if any, data is there to show as the theory of change worked in terms of the ongoing market impact after the market development team was sunsetted, or is it a little less clear how things are playing out, or I'm really curious how that's evolved?
Some of the market development team joined an organization called Stroomversnelling. I'm probably saying that really incorrectly. So they are still active in the market and I think they still do energy efficiency advocacy. There were a couple of general contracting firms like BAM, and I have to think about the names of the others, but they took on the renovation market and created whole lines for panelized retrofits. I think during the pandemic, they struggled a little bit more because the renovation market, they couldn't interface with the tenants anymore because of lockdowns and things like that. So it was a little bit of a struggle. One of the original organizations from the Dutch team, and there's still active renovations going on there, but it's not really tracked or formalized in the same way. And I would say that they've branched out into other areas too, because the panels were expensive, to think about other ways that were non-panelized that still minimize tenant disruption and were quick and easy to install. It's a little bit harder to say now, honestly. but there are still people working on the grants with us that are in the Netherlands and were part of the original program.
Adam, Garrett, Lori, anybody have a burning question?
I have a question. This is always on my mind, but it's been on my mind a lot this week. We're really finding that we need to influence a culture shift from thinking about simple payback and return on investment kind of decision making to life cycle costing focused, so that we're not just looking at the quick capital costs and trying to find a 10 or so year ROI. I'm just curious your thoughts on that. It really isn't how you do it. We know how to make a business case, but we present them and they're just like, yeah, but this one's cheaper right now. Love to have some advice.
Sam, I think you should go first.
I have to admit, I'm a little dubious about life cycle cost analysis for mainstream building owners and mainstream homeowners. Even for me, it's a complicated concept to get my arms around all of it. What about life cycle costs on buildings that aren't resilient and then go into landfill and don't ever get to serve their full purpose because they weren't built resilient? There are just so many complicated factors. I just think there's a lot of good research about what's emotional that moves the needle. In Plymouth University, they did a study auditing hundreds of homes in Bristol, England, with and without an infrared camera diagnostic. And just the infrared image with the assessment had 5 times greater homeowners to the uptake on doing the energy retrofit than without the infrared camera assessment. And 75% of the homes that had the assessment with the infrared camera engaged in the retrofit. What we're doing is saying, here's the biggest house you own, and look at all the defects. You want to leave it with all the defects, or should we fix all that missing insulation and ear sealing and water damage? What we have to do is make it emotional. That concept, what you want to do is target the feeling that people care about. I just don't think they care about life cycle cost analysis, but they are emotional if their biggest asset they own is defective or hold its value or substandard. There's some concept I think can move the needle. And so that would be my recommendation.
Can I ask a follow-up? Because when I asked that, I totally buy that with single family homeowners. But when you're talking to a municipality, they're still saying, what's the cheapest thing today? And that's where the trick is. I think I can try and appeal to their emotions.
Yeah, you got to figure out who's the audience for your message and tailor to the audience. I think, and we can agree, in some cases, you're stuck in that's your value proposition. Then there's life cycle cost analysis, there's embodied energy, there's EPDs, and you can start going crazy trying to explain why to do something when just the business case for, again, commercial buildings and rental buildings to do the upgrades are pretty impressive if we just work on what they already care about.
Adam, Garrett, I want to give you each a chance. We do have a couple of questions in the audience, but thank you all for answering as you go. So if you haven't had a look, take the Q&A. Garrett?
Quick question here for Sam. Talk about having a common group leading, providing direction to the backbone of a home energy renovation program, if you were to do something like that. I'm curious, what do you see as the role of industry there? Do you see the creation of a new type of service where someone's going to opt for this service to homeowners to help them plan, execute, understand the retrofits? And then in time, they become more literate in it. As kids see this happening, they grow up. Or what do you see the role of industry? How does it evolve?
That's a great question, Clark. I generally see the role of industry is to respond to all the market opportunity that good policy and good program design can create. Energy Sprong is a great case in point where they can do really good typology analysis and come up with bulk purchase agreements and committed purchases of retrofits. And industrialized housing companies are willing to make the investment, build a plant, and innovate those plants so they are really cost effective because they are responding to the market conditions that good policy and good programs can create. A lot of those policies is trying to correct market defects that are going on. We oversubsidize fossil fuels insanely high so that we don't really pay the true cost in our fossil fuel and high carbon fuels. I think that's, for me, the big thing. But the important part is always doing this in concert with industry. When Energy Star developed its specifications for its products and so forth. It did it in lockstep with the industry, understanding what they could do, what the supply chain constraints were, what were the innovation opportunities that, again, not have really failures. It's really doing everything in very substantial collaboration with industry just to get it all right. So their role is to respond and be a good collaborator. But others may say different.
Yeah. Adam?
My question's for Amy. Our project's largely in remote locations, and the facilities are typically not in the best condition. Is Energy Sprung at a place right now where it can be deployed at scale in remote locations? What are the variables that are impacting whether or not that can be done at scale at a community level, considering the skills and technologies and equipment that are required to deploy it at scale?
Yeah, we had this challenge in California as well, trying to do a demonstration project in the Central Valley that was in the middle of farmland, basically. It was tough to find a contractor, a manufacturer that would take the project on, do something new, and not insanely mark it up. After we did that demonstration project, took a little bit of a step back of, okay, what other market upskilling do we need to do in order to get to the desired end result that we want? We started working with the Advanced Building Construction Collaborative, which was also part of the U.S. Department of Energy, about getting more manufacturers involved, thinking about what training policy needs the state and the overall country needed for industrialized construction, upskilling, and to get that to scale. I think California passed a couple of additional funding programs specifically for industrialized construction. In the absence of that, it's really thinking about what works in those geographies and what can you do. Industrialized construction might not be the answer, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It worked in Europe because there was a little bit more of history with it. The countries are a lot more well connected. There aren't so many rural areas. So I think it's reasonable to think about, is that actually a good choice, or is there potential to build a factory nearby? All those kinds of things. I don't know if that's useful.
A little bit is, thank you.
Just if I can insert again, doing attic upgrades in all those homes inland California where it's brutal heat would just be huge.
Yeah.
And otherwise it's pretty moderate climate. Your delta T across your wall enclosure year round's roughly about 30 degrees, not much. So if you can just get that attic done. So sometimes we're focused on, again, we're overwhelmed because we haven't shrunk the change. And if you shrink the change to just the attic upgrade, and if the ducts are up there, you might want to consider insulating the slope instead of what might be insulation on the flat. And maybe also a radiant barrier and other techniques to just get that attic under control. It's 160 during the day in that location.
That's actually what we ended up recommending for the California typologies that we studied. We demonstrated one panelized retrofit. It was very clear that it wasn't the best solution for California because you don't need a super robust panel with so much insulation. There's earthquake risks. Our buildings are made of wood and not brick. It was just, is this really the right solution? And so we had to think about how can we stick to these core principles of good, fast, affordable, but for California. And that it was a lot of what Sam was saying. And then it became more on process optimization of how do you train people and how do you deliver this more quickly based on a typology study or working with portfolio owners who they've figured out more of the finance things. So I think there are different, it's not a one size fits all solution, I guess, the Energy Sprung model. It's more of those principles to think about that.
There are two questions that Brian and Lori are poised to ask. And if you two can keep your answers to 1 or 2 minutes, that would be super. So let's start with Brian. Can the speakers highlight the conditions in their market where the business case for a retrofit is strongest? Go.
That's a great question. I would point out 2 factors that we see. One is about timing. When it comes to retrofits, we find that timing is really everything. Where it becomes more cost effective is when we have those buildings where there's multiple significant building systems at end of life that the owner realizes and buys into the idea that they need to do something, replace anyways. So it shifts us from having this huge cost that we need to makes sense for the building owner saying, okay, your base scenario is you're replacing heating, hot water, ventilation, etc. And let's look at what the cost would be, the delta is to do something that's going to be energy efficient and low carbon, and business case on that basis. Huge difference. And just learning more each year about what kind of systems we can screen for, stuff we hadn't thought of. For example, one building, super cost effective because the heating, it was like 80 years old and the heating risers were leaking and they needed to completely replace that. So all of a sudden, okay, going to a BRF type system actually was lower cost then. So timing can be everything. The other thing is with the sector and what kind of public support is offered to it. So when we work with community housing, social housing, we might be able to get capital grants that cover up to 50% of the cost. That's a smaller share in rental apartment, and condos, it's much smaller, just whatever utility incentives. Other things being equal, we can go deeper and have a better business case for it with the social housing. And it's most challenging with the condo market, which is left out of a lot of the programs in our area.
And it makes you think about what Amy was saying, and what we heard even in our interviews is that people don't know their options. And so making sure that people know these groups are out here, that they can help me find out just how you can do your regular upgrades better when it's time to do those upgrades, as opposed to making them this big sort of independent cost outside of what your general building renewal plan is. Okay, Lori, there is a question for you. Please expand on the non-holistic contractor consultant problem. Any thoughts or initiatives you have to counter that? You have 2 minutes.
Oh, that's hard. I could talk the day about this. There's two things going on. A lot of decision making around buildings is not proactive, it's reactive. I was at an HRAI event last week where they said that 90% of HVAC replacements are emergency related. I think that's in the single family market, but still, there's not an understanding that of the interrelated performance of equipment upgrades or envelope upgrades. And so I've worked with a lot of property owners who have replaced equipment with heat pumps, and then they're still uncomfortable. They still have mold. They still have problems. And so we need to be holistic to address both the energy and non-energy related issues with our buildings. In our region, almost nobody hires an engineer or a consultant to help them figure out what to do with their building unless it's a very large project. They just call a bunch of contractors and find out prices for a new thing. The way that Recover is initially, at least, hoping to deal with that, it's partly through case studies, but case studies are only so effective. They certainly are effective, but as part of the research that we're doing, we've identified the prevalent archetypes in our region. And as we go forward, we will be developing the retrofit recipe for each archetype so that we can socialize that a bit.
Amazing. Thank you, everybody. This has been such a great discussion, and I'm sure we can continue for another several hours just between two of you speaking. I do want to wrap up, though, returning to an important point made during an interview, which really, I think, aligns with many of the experiences talked here or spoken about here. 4 years is barely enough to do a deep energy retrofit, let alone to change a dialogue before they get a project moving. What we really are trying to do is nothing short of a complete transformation. And in 2021, my colleague Brendan Haley co-wrote Canada's Retrofit Mission report, which was foundational to the creation of DRAI. And coincidentally, the Greener Neighborhoods pilot program, or the GNPP, was also being developed at the same time, though also by Enercan, but out of the same office. So DRAI set up 13 retrofit accelerators, while GNPP set up 7 market development teams. As Lori mentioned, they actually received both of them, whereas DRAI is focused on Part 3, or complex buildings. The GNPP is focused on smaller, mostly Part 9 buildings, and yet anyone dealing with portfolios knows that they're managing all shapes and sizes of buildings. A few differences between these programs, but we know that demand and supply need to be moving together towards these volume deals, as Amy describes them, and not in isolation. I think that it's kind of poetic irony that the 2 retrofit programs emerged at the same time out of the same department, and it's rather metaphorical for how fragmented our retrofit ecosystem is, that these 2 programs are really parts of the same whole. We've been hearing all these exciting developments, but really to be transformative, we need a policy framework that helps get past this fragmented delivery. So we're recommending a mission-oriented approach that stabilizes the momentum our teams have started. They need to be shifting away from providing direct services, actually doing the planning and the assessing, towards being intermediaries between supply and demand and working with government as well. This isn't going to be as simple as providing concierge services. In fact, when we don't need concierge services anymore, we will have succeeded. And I think we're seeing that in the Netherlands. New construction has been transformed through advanced building codes, and we need people on the ground, like market development teams, who are thinking about how to get an equivalent North Star, which I think is some of the work that Sam is working through right now for single-family homes. This means that these teams and these groups need to be able to experiment. We need to let them figure out how to remove complexities and testing solutions and have room to make mistakes and communicate those mistakes. We need them partnering with modern housing industry and incubating things like new financial models and new businesses and delivery models, such as the ones that have spun out of Energy Sprong. They need to be available to be engaging government in developing appropriate support, such as enabling the Canada Infrastructure Bank to potentially be able to fund pooled projects or co-creating national level assessment tools and databases, rather than teams having to scrape together all of this information from the publicly available internet. To be ready for 2050, we need stable mission-driven institutions. So just like we now have Build Canada Homes, we need something like Retrofit Canada Homes, which could be a specialized operating agency, not necessarily within government, that has that clear mission and accounts for what it needs from every government department. But despite the systemic constraints, I think we're seeing really cool hints of this. TAF developing a panel manufacturer pre-qualification list, 4 Winds, helping communities figure out how to get utility costs under control and be able to use those funds for the things that they really want to be doing in their communities. Alberta EcoTrust cutting front-end costs in half, and Recover creating a housing database to provide the kinds of the right supports at the right time. And every interview we've talked to has talked about bridging trust between owners and industry. And I think that those are such important functions. So again, I want to thank each of our speakers and to thank all of you for not only sharing your time with us today, but also for all the work I know you are doing to help Canada's buildings be better. Please stay connected, get in touch with your local retrofit accelerators or market development teams, and to learn how you can get involved, join Canada's Retrofit Mission by scanning this QR code. Please watch out for Efficiency Canada's upcoming research report, as well as for other opportunities to engage. But most importantly, we are in the middle of unprecedented momentum. And that is the first time I have used that word and been happy about using unprecedented, at least in the last 5 years. So let's keep Canada's Retrofit Mission at the top of everyone's minds. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day or evening.